Hello, hello, and welcome back to Southern Handmade. My name is Patrick, and I am so glad you are here. I'm a big fan of Dungeons and Dragons. I'm a big fan of fantasy. I'm a big fan of all those things. So recently, I started working on a project to make something like a Tortle character of my own design. It was a really interesting process. I did it slowly over the course of many streams, sort of at the tail end of some of the projects I was working on, and I had a really great time doing it. I do stream every week, Tuesday to Friday, 11:30 a.m. Eastern Daylight Time. Love to see you there. It's twitch.tv/Southern Handmade. It's a good time. It's where I make these projects, and I'd love to see you there. Oh, and with this one, I decided to try to take it a little slower to talk about my process. Let me know if you like that style, because I can do more of them in the future. But for now, let's get to the sculpt. So to start with, I had a very basic sketch of what I wanted to do. A very large shell on the turtle that came out from these tiny little legs. You can see a side profile here as well. And so I started with this base of a U shape for the legs and began to build up the clay around the bottom of each foot. The goal was to have a really wide base going into sort of skinny upper thighs. Once the shapes were in place, I began to use a thin tool to sort of draw in some stress lines along the legs where there'd be little folds. Once I was happy with the basic shape, I began to work on where the toes would go. I figured there'd need to be a few folds there, and then we would add some bulk along the base of the foot. This bulk would serve as the foundation for where the toes would ultimately go. Poked holes for each of the toes, and then began to create some space in and around them to define each of the toes. I took triangles of clay to make nails and pushed them into position. And then finally, I took small strips of clay and began to fill in the area in and around the toes, blending them into each other. I also added an extra toe, but I didn't show it on camera. With the basic of the foot together, I began working on a texture for the scaliness of the turtle. Basically, I was drawing hexagon-ish shapes, connecting each of them to each other, starting very wide at the top of the leg, and then getting smaller and smaller as we went around the back. This was a slow and delicate process that once these lines were drawn, I went back in with a smooth tip color shaper to sort of soften some of the edges I was creating. I think the effect works really well, but it does take a long time. I sped it up for your convenience. When both legs were finished and baked, I was ready to move on to the next part of the process. I added another layer of wiring to my armature and wrapped it in clay. This was not the best way to do it because in the end it wasn't nearly as strong as I wanted it to be, but we go on adding aluminum foil and hoping for the best. We build out the shape of the body using the aluminum foil. And then of course, once we get the size we want, we begin covering that shape with some clay. And once we have roughly the shape we want, I turn to the bottom of the shell and begin adding clay to it. I use some of the Sculpting Bacon Bond, or whatever it's called these days, oven baked clay adhesive, and cover the area that I want to cover, and then begin adding bits of clay to reflect the bottom of a turtle. The goal here was to shape towards having a gap between the top of the shell and the bottom that could be the place where the arm and the head comes from, and then to build the shape of pectoral muscles going back along the bottom. So I took shapes of rectangles and just began to draw in those muscles. Once the basic shape was in, I drew some detailed lines and I added a ridge around the edge. Unfortunately, I lost this footage, so you'll see it in just a moment, the completed version of the base of the turtle shell. With that base together, I began working on the arm. Now, I wanted this character to be something of a wise turtle carrying books. I sort of called it my turtle bookmobile. And so I wanted him to be carrying a staff with a light on it. It's sort of symbolic of knowledge and wisdom. This old turtle roaming the land, trying to accumulate knowledge and share it with people. And so as I built the arm, I connected it to a staff. This also helped for support. It meant that we had 3 points of support on the project, which was very helpful in the end. So I built up the staff, getting just a basic coverage and testing it along the shape of my turtle, and then began shaping the rest of the metal to make sure that when it was in place, it would fit nicely and go very well. I took some pliers and shaped the top of the staff to make a space where a lantern could hang before covering that with clay as well. Once I was happy with the position, I began adding clay both to the rest of the staff and to the arms as well. Wanted to maintain a similar shape to that of the legs with a very wide end and a very narrow connection point to the rest of the body. So I bulked up that wrist nice and thick. When I was happy with the shape of the arm, I began working on the details, adding lines for the tree to make sure that the branch looked more and more like a branch. And I added rolls of clay for fingers and a thumb, blended them in, and of course added the texturing similar to the legs along the top side of the arms. I was happy with the arms. I made a second one very similar to the first and started on the head. I took a very basic approach to this head. I made a oval shape and began cutting in the shape of a mouth. This was all attached to one of my wire armatures. And the goal being a slight overbite similar to what you'd see on a turtle with a little triangle poking down underneath and a little bit of a smile to him as well. I was happy with the basic shape of the head. I began working on the nostrils, the snout. And then take a ball stylus to add sockets for eyes along the top of the head. I was happy with this positioning. I took a small ball of clay to make an eye on either side. Built along the bottom of the eye to make the bottom of the eyelid. Then took a thicker strip to apply along the top of the eye to shape in the eye. And of course, I repeated that process on the other side, doing my best to match. And once I was happy with the general shape of the head, I added similar details as to the other parts of the body that were scaly. I also took some time to add some wrinkles, because this turtle is supposed to be old. So I took some time to draw some jawline wrinkles, as well as some wrinkles around the eyes, and then along the neck as well. Then along the top, I drew a similar pattern to the scales that I drew along the legs and the arms, just to have some consistency between the scaly areas. With the head and arms complete, I blended them into the body and positioned them with some super glue and began working on the top of the shell. At this point, everything you see here is more or less baked, minus a head or arm. And so we're just using some of that oven bake clay in order to prepare the surface to take on the shape of the upper shell. So what I did was I made loose hexagons out of clay and placed them one at a time in the shape that I was going for. I used reference images of shells to help me sort of get a loose sense of what I wanted and worked from there. Once the whole shell was covered along the top, I added and blended the ridge to make it look like the shell was one piece. And then I went about adding the detail to those shapes, making sure to have distinct lines between each of the pieces of the shell and to smooth them out to make them look much more natural and sort of as one distinct piece. I used a flat edge to help make the angles even more pronounced. Along the edge, I made a similar pattern, trying just to follow along with the lines I'd already made. I smoothed it all out with a little bit of isopropyl alcohol, just trying to get some of the core shape a little bit smoother. Although I didn't need too much perfection here. I wanted to get some of the higher ridges down and get rid of some of my fingerprints. Here I took a firmer tool than I usually use, not quite as much as a metal tool, but firmer tip, and started drawing in a sort of spiral pattern on each of the shells in order to give them some more texture and shaping similar to that of a turtle shell. Then I add similar lines along the edge, just keeping that vertical shape going down around the shell. Make sure to blend in some of those arms, make sure they're on secure. Last but not least, I wanted to put bookshelves on the back of this turtle, so I needed to sort of destroy a little bit of the work that I'd done and create some flat surfaces on which I could put some bookshelves. Again, this is supposed to be something of a walking bookmobile, so these shelves were going to be a big part of the final piece. Once happy, I baked it and began working on the shelves. Now, the shelves themselves were just going to be simple strips of clay with some books and other various things on top of them. So I begin by making one template and then create 3 other versions of the same thing. With all 3 shelves done, I go about trying to add some detail to them, cutting away a few pieces here or there, just trying to make it look a little bit worn, and then using a vein tool, very thin tip, to draw in some wooden texture lines just to make it look more and more like wood itself. Once all 3 shelves were finished, it was time to start making some books. So I show the process of making one book here, which is basically I make a rectangle and then I use a flat edge to try to make it straight. And then I use an even smaller flat edge to try to draw in the lower part of the book where the pages would be, to separate the cover from the pages. So this flat tool here is used to that purpose. Now this was going to be for a small stack of books, and so each book needed to be in its own sort of position, so I made these books individually to start with. And we made 3 books of varying sizes and shapes in order to stack them on top of each other. This was just an effort to try to make the shelves a little bit more distinct from each other. And you can see the shelves look something like that. For the second shelf, I wanted just to have all books along it, so I made a rectangle of clay and added some height and some depth to it in order to give us some variety. And then out of this core shape, I slowly began to shape individual books that were all connected to each other, but had the distinction of the page separations and, of course, separating the spines from each other along this shape. This was a very quick way of making books comparatively to making each book individually. And I think it works out, especially for the second row of books that we're going to be together anyways. The shaping process was basically the same for each book as it was for the smaller books. So I jumped ahead here just to show you more or less what the final result was going to look like. And then as I added extra details to the books to try to make them distinct from each other along their spines. And of course I attached it to the shelf. Now for the final shelf, I wanted to do something different. So I made some scrolls and stacked them in the unique little pile just for something interesting. And then I made some bottles and a quill, sort of the section of book mending, so that if the books got broken or maybe he was writing more information in his travels, he had these supplies precariously balanced on the back of his shelf, which I thought brought some life and character to these shelves. Last but not least, I shaped a lantern out of a rectangle of clay, just making a gap for where the glass would be lowered from the rest of the frame, and added a metal rod through it so that I could ultimately loop it around the stick that we had made and place it on the project as a hanging piece. And as we wrap up here, I am ready to show you the final reveal. Now, I didn't put the painting process in this video because we're already approaching like half an hour in terms of the length of this video. I'm hoping maybe to do a painting version that'll be a little bit shorter and much more of a normal time lapse with a little bit of instruction on what I did, kind of like this. But it's going to have to wait for another video. So let's jump to the final reveal and show you the fully painted project. Let's check it out. And there you have it, my Turtle Man, the bookmobile turtle seeking out ancient wisdom and bringing it to the people. Come borrow a book from him or share a story with him, and he'd love to hear all about it and put it in one of his books. I really had a great time making this project. It's one of my favorites. It's so special to me because not only is it something I made, but it's my own unique design, my own take on this thing. And I really wanted to do it justice in this video. I hope that you enjoyed it. If you did, please comment and hit a like and subscribe for more. I love making these things, and it was such a joy to make this. I made it on my live stream. You can always come check out what's going on in the live stream there. Give me suggestions for things to make. Give me advice on how to do better at sculpting, because let's face it, we can always get better. And yeah, we just have a lot of fun there. It's twitch.tv/SouthernHandmade, 11:30 a.m. Eastern Daylight Time. Come check it out. And yeah, there's lots of videos here on the channel you can check out. I just did one on my top 5 favorite and my least favorite. It's a lot of fun just to see the ones that I don't like, and the ones I really do like. It's a great place to start if you are new to the channel. And of course, thank you to those who have subscribed in the past. We're just past 200 and it keeps growing, and that's all because of you. So thank you so much for being here. And of course, until next time, keep being awesome.